Hello, and you're very welcome to the Howth Spirituality channel. Today we have Sister Bernie. Hi, Bernie.
How are you, Simon?
Good, thanks. And thanks very much for agreeing to join us today.
Well, you're very welcome.
Thanks. So, Bernie, could we start off by you just telling us, how do you define your religion or your spirituality? What sort of words do you put on it?
Well, I would find it as a simple faith. A faith I learned when I was very young, as a child, learned it at home, and developed it over years. I suppose in school I learned to understand it a bit more. And then with the sacrament of confirmation, I would have been strengthened by that faith, in that faith. Later on, it would have developed further when I entered the novitiate of the Little Sisters of the Assumption when I was 18. And I got a very disciplined training there in meditation and in the presence of God and in sharing and in understanding why I was doing what I chose to do. And over the years it would have developed to a stage where I would have seen where it is a life of love, a life of challenging love, and it's a daily effort to do that. Okay, so you've said an awful lot there, and lots of interesting things to come back to. Maybe just to go back a little bit, the first thing you said, I think the first words you said was a simple faith. And I'd be really interested in that and to come back to that. But the first, sounds like your earliest kind of development of faith came from the home. Yes. And could you just tell us a little bit about how that happened? What was going on in the home? And what's your memory of sort of absorbing that, or how did that work? Well, it was just like our meal times. We had prayer every evening. My grandparents would have been going to, my grandfather particularly went to Mass every morning, and my grandmother would have been there with him and supporting him, and he would have brought me to Mass when I was very young. I would have been about 4, and I have a memory of him giving me a prayer book when I was 4, and I wasn't really able to read, but each time I would go with him and I'd sit beside him, he would give me this prayer book when he would be saying his own prayers from his own book. And he'd take the book from me when we'd be going out of the church, because in case I would damage it. So I didn't have it like to use during the day, but I was very aware that his life was surrounded by prayer. And my mother and father would have been there in the evening, so we all knelt down to say the rosary every evening. And we always prayed for the holy souls. And he'd pray for the forgotten souls, so that I always knew there were people who needed prayer, whom maybe their families were no longer present, who could remember them, so they remembered them. So I became very conscious of the holy souls, and I knew with the cemetery beside us, and my grandfather would be looking out with his binoculars. He was probably looking out at the boats and the sea, and he'd be praying for the holy souls, and I thought he was seeing these holy souls. Right. But of course he wasn't. It was his prayer, it penetrated his whole lifespan and his whole day. Okay. So he was a very powerful influence in terms of your own formation of faith as a young child. Yes, and I recall that he would always have medals and the rosary beads, and he'd have the picture of the Sacred Heart. And that picture of the Sacred Heart kind of dominated the main living room, and he would always bring in wild, fresh flowers and put them in a vase in front of that picture of the Sacred Heart. So that picture was kind of very dominant in the room, and that was my memory from a very young child. And so it's a very strong influences in the home, from your grandfather, but also from your parents, and saying the rosary as a family. And then you mentioned you moving out into school as a slightly older child. Yes, I went to the national school here in Howth. It's now St. Columbanus Hall. So I went there till I made my first Holy Communion, and I was 7 then. And then I did 2 years up in the senior school here in Howth, which was also the national school. And at that stage, my mother decided that she would send me to secondary school in Dublin. So my sister and myself went into King's Inn Street, which was run by the Irish Sisters of Charity. And there was a very strong religious influence in that school as well. And we had annual retreats there as children. And we would have had 3 days of prayer and talks from Jesuits usually. So I was very grounded in religion from a very young stage.
And as a child, when you did these 3-day retreats of prayer, how kind of seriously did you take that? What was that? Can you remember what it was like for you?
It was. I regarded it as a development of what happened during my childhood, because when I was at home, we would have been sent to the devotions in the evening time. The rosary and benediction would be at least twice a week. And we were also sent to the choir to sing in the choir, which meant we were always connected with the church. So I was surrounded by religion from a very young stage, and the school kind of was an extension of that.
Okay. And then, so as an 18-year-old, or maybe before
that,
you made this decision.
I was quite young when I made that decision. I was about 9, right. And I recall when I was 9 being very definite. Now, I had no influence from my mother or father. They didn't push me at any stage, but I prayed a lot when I was quite young, and I remember asking one of the priests who was giving a retreat in Howth about joining an order, and I was only 9, and he gave me an address at that stage, but I didn't follow that through. I just went on to kind of with my usual living, and I did go for an interview then when I was 17 to the Irish Sisters of Charity in Mount St. Anne's in Milltown, and I was accepted there at that stage. But one of the curates in Howth called me then and said to me, I don't think you would last too long there, because it's very strict, but I will give you another number to ring. And it was the Little Sisters of the Assumption. So I said to him, yes, I will try that. And that's how I made that decision.
Okay.
So I was 18 then.
Okay. Interesting. And in retrospect, that piece of advice you got, do you think that was a good piece of advice, or?
Yes, I think it was, because I possibly wouldn't have stayed. I don't know, it's very difficult to know, but I had been to school to those sisters, and it would have been a natural thing for me to join them. But I took his advice, and I went and did a retreat out in Mount St. Joseph in Clondalkin at the age of 18, and met the superior there, and read a bit about the life, and found myself kind of drawn. And I experienced a whole surge of joy about it. Uh-huh. And I remember that surge of joy at that time. Uh-huh. Never had that again until I remember that surge of joy happening to me once more when the Pope came to Ireland. And I remember the flight of the airline over the Phoenix Park. And I remember that surge of joy repeating itself. It came from the depths of my being. And I have a memory of that. Okay. 2 occasions in my life.
Okay. So the first was as an 18-year-old?
Yes.
And was that in 1979? John Paul II?
Yes. Yeah. And I remember that. So it just kind of stayed with me, that the 2 occasions. So.
Okay. What sort of reaction did you get from the people around you, your family, but also your friends? Would it have been the case that you would have been very much removing yourself from family and friends, having made this decision? And how would they have reacted to that?
Well, my friends accepted it quite normally, because quite a lot of girls at that time were entering convents. It wasn't unusual. And particularly from the school I was in, quite a number of girls would have entered different convents at different stages. So they didn't think anything. They didn't think it anyway strange.
Was it possible to continue the friendship? Did you have time to?
Well, I tried to. I wrote to most of the friends, and I kept up the correspondence. And I said, one of my friends, I still keep in touch with her. And the others I would contact every Christmas. So they would know and they would have kept in touch. So the correspondence would have continued. So that the friendships didn't really dwindle completely. But there was a time when we weren't free to visit as you might have liked to.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And in terms of your beliefs at that stage in your life and your kind of understandings, can you say a bit about that as you started the rigorous study that started happening at that time?
Yes, I suppose I accepted it as part of the development and part of the discipline of the order. And I was with a number of girls who were the same age as myself. So there would have been about 6 of us together. So it was easy to fall in with the plan. The novitiate was fairly enclosed. We had a spiritual year for 1 year, and then we had a second year where we were introduced to the apostolate, which was the work of the congregation. And during those years, you were free to kind of say it didn't suit you, or you could have been sent home and told that you weren't suitable. So I used to pray that, well, at least if they tell me I'm not suitable, at least I'll know I'm not supposed to be here. But it never happened.
Was that nerve-wracking? Was there...
No, but I saw other girls being sent home, not knowing why. But I was saying, well, at least they know they're not meant to be here now. And I was saying, well, I wonder, will they send me? But I was never sent. So I remained. Okay. And to this day, I'm still there.
Okay. And so you chose a sort of path within that in terms of... Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yes, well, I believe everybody's journey is different, and I believe the Lord treats us all differently. So I would know from the friends I have made within the order that we're not at all treated the same. And how he treated me would have been very gently and led me along very slowly. And I would have got to know him, talking about Christ, got to know him at a level that he wanted me to get to know him at different stages. He doesn't ever show you too much at one time, and sometimes it's in retrospect you see his movements and why he does things or why you're asked to do things. He is a forgiving person and totally faithful to his side of the bargain. I have experienced that.
Can you say a bit more about that?
Yes, the vows are part of the life. So there's the 3 vows. You have chastity, poverty and obedience. And while you commit to those at the beginning, the living out of those is something that's revealed gradually to you. Obedience, perhaps the most difficult one, in that your own will, you give up a lot of what you might desire to do yourself, and you have to consider what he really wants. It's in solitude and in reflection that you get to know his will, and that is possibly where he's leading me at the moment, into this space where I will have more time to be aware of his requirement rather than my own. I've been a very busy person up to now, doing a lot of work, and it's very easy to get so busy and so caught up in work that you can put him kind of into the background. So I have a feeling that he's drawing me away from that and away from my family who live here, so that I'll have more time to focus on his need and what he wants me to do for the future. Chastity is giving up of the marriage, really, mm-hmm. and everything that goes with that side of living, mm-hmm. which is a huge sacrifice. Maybe when I was entering at 18, I didn't realise how demanding that is. But as I went on, I could see that it is a lifelong commitment to someone where there is no physical contact in that sense.
Okay. And then poverty was the third vow.
Poverty is where you give up. Poverty is really living a simple lifestyle where you only use what you really need. The reason being was so that you can share with others, and that you don't put material stuff in front of him before his need. And that's, again, it's a living out of I suppose, out of asceticism, where you give up things that are legitimately quite nice to have, and quite happily you could live with it and you could desire it, but it's really for another reason. I suppose I think of John the Baptist a bit there, because he gave up everything to go into the desert, but it was for a purpose. And that, again, is difficult. So you have 3 vows and you have to balance those in your lifestyle.
Could you maybe just tell us a bit about your day-to-day life and how your beliefs are lived out in your day-to-day life?
Well, every day I would go to Mass.
Mm-hmm.
I would see the Mass as central, and there would be an occasional day that I mightn't get there, but I would usually structure my day so that I would give space to the Mass, and I'd give time to the reception of Christ and to be with him for a little while each day. And around the rest...
Is that during the Mass?
That's during the Mass,
okay, yeah.
yes.
So one of the meanings of the Mass is receiving Christ and being around Christ.
Yes, and there would be a sense of peace. Not always, I wouldn't experience that always, but I have experienced a deep peace after receiving Christ in Holy Communion. And I would know that that presence is not from myself, it would be another presence. And it would be... I would be aware that a lot of people in the church would have the same experience. Difficult to put words on that, but it's the Spirit of Christ that is tangible from time to time.
You're experiencing a peace that is sort of somehow outside of you, not just you. It's and then there's an awareness that there's others around you having some sort of similar experience.
Yes, I would be aware of that. And so
you're drawn to that on a daily basis? On
a daily basis I would be drawn to that. And I have gone to the Redemptive Stream Convent in Drumcondra in the evening time, where they would have a liturgy around the Mass, which would be an extra special kind of liturgy where they chant a lot of the prayers, and it would be a contemplative type Mass. So I would go there occasionally just to renew my own fervour, because they'd be totally focused.
And how does that work? How does it renew your fervour? Can you say a bit about that?
I think I would be conscious that they've given up everything. Like, they would be there every evening, every day, and they get up at 5 a.m. They would pray from early morning, and they would have a routine every day where they would have space for prayer. And it becomes evident in their faces. I can see it when I go there.
So there's something about
the contemplative life that you can recognise the commitment to Christ. I think it's important, to leave people where they're at, not to try to probe or to feel that you have to do things for other people when they're not ready for it.
Is that something that you've learned through life, or? Yes,
I think one has to be gentle with people. It isn't always possible, but one can pray about situations. And very often when you pray about situations, they can resolve.
You mentioned about the holy souls, is that the phrase? And people in your life who are no longer, who've passed. What about for yourself, Bernie? What's your kind of belief and thoughts about when you die? What happens to you?
What happens to me? I would believe... I believe that we're in a different space, but I think we will know each other, and there'd be a lot of happiness, and sometimes here we can transcend ourselves. We very often do transcend ourselves, and you could, when that happens, it's usually something to do with somebody else, that somebody very sick and you've been up all day working, you might stay up all night with them. You kind of transcend the physical a bit, and the tiredness seems to pass, even though you would be exhausted after it. I think when we die, we don't experience the tiredness anymore or the sickness anymore, but we will be aware of everybody, and it'll be a different. It's like a transcendence from the physical, but without the pain and the sorrow.
Okay, and are you saying we get glimpses of that sometimes, particularly when we step outside of ourselves and we're assisting others?
Yeah, and I think that's for every human being. It isn't just for people who are religious. I think we can do that. It's a different state, but it's a happy state. I believe that.
Okay. And that's in a state that can be achieved regardless of your religious belief or practice?
Yes, because I think we are spiritual beings.
Regardless of our religious...
Yes, we are spiritual and physical combined.
Okay.
But he has said that we'll have the resurrection of the body, which means that the physical will be there as well, in a different dimension. The devil is very powerful. Like he's a powerful spirit, and is working today fairly powerfully in our culture.
Okay. So it's back to prayer, Bernie,
Yes.
in terms of how you
Yes.
cope with these things, or how people cope with these things.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. Well, Bernie, it's been really interesting talking to you today, and thanks so much for sharing your thoughts. Is there anything else you'd like to say before we finish up? Or?
Well, thank you very much, Simon. I'm delighted now to have done this. It was something I suppose I didn't expect to be asked to do, only for Johnny.
Yeah.
Thank you, Johnny.
Yeah.
So hopefully what I've said will be of some help.
Good. Okay. Well, I very much enjoyed listening to it.
Thank you.